Yeah.
All the Jews are somewhere in Ukraine. And then at some point, usually they all decided to move to Israel, but they're all related to Khazars. There's always like some story about how the ancient Jews disappeared and now it's modern Jews. And the more I talk to Muslims, the more I realize that this narrative is from the Muslim world. So the first question is this a story that you've heard of, or a narrative that you've heard, and how would you respond to it? And
Okay, so yeah, I mean, look, the concept of the Khazars came from Arthur Kessler, who otherwise was an interesting guy, but it's a crackpot theory. And now you have this book, Shlomo Sand, The Invention of the Jewish People, which is the same kind of deal. Yasser Arafat, there's one of the things that, first of all, this belief is pervasive. And in fact, Yasser Arafat once told Bill Clinton, I have to tell you, I don't think the Jews were ever in Palestine. And you know what Bill Clinton said? So who exactly was Jesus? To his undying credit, that was Bill's response. There is this narrative, but the deeper point actually about that narrative is a fundamental problem, which is what you might call the closing of the Muslim mind. After the suicide bombing of the Coptic church in Alexandria, the narrative in the Egyptian press across the board, not just the Muslim Brotherhood, but secular, so-called liberal writers, even Coptic Christian writers, was that this was a Zionist plot. And there were two competing theories. One was that the Mossad directly had bombed the church. And the second was that Al-Qaeda was operationally under the control of the Mossad. And the Mossad had sent Al-Qaeda to do this and therefore divide Egyptians and crack national unity, et cetera, et cetera. This is very worrying because you have, when you sort of listen to the debates in the Muslim world, it's like both sides are cracked. You talk to people who describe themselves as liberals, and everything for them is this fanatical, bizarre, anti-Semitic conspiracy. They're deeply steeped into this, which is one of the reasons why I'm very skeptical about the uprisings, the future of the uprisings in the Arab world, because if you have a political dialectic in which neither side has any kind of sensible analysis of what's wrong in their societies, you're not going to get productive political outcomes. In the United States, you have Democrats, you've got Republicans. Wherever you stand, they both are sort of approaching things from more or less the standpoint of planet Earth. But that's not true in the Arab world. And so this notion of Jews having no connection to the land, of having just sort of gotten off the boat from the Crimea or whatever, and taking the land has become absolutely pervasive. I can give you a million examples of that, but you can't deal with that narrative. You can't deal with people who are simply not operating in any kind of rational framework. David Brooks, whom I hate to quote, once made a point, I forgot what the context was, but he said, it's not that simply that the Muslim world and the West that they have different ideas. It's they have different ideas about ideas. And that's actually a very profound, no, actually it's a Jejun and second-rate analysis, but David made it, and I thought I'd give him some credit. But that kind of gets to the heart of it. And by the way, one thing that's important is there are limits to, persuasion has its limits. There are people you can talk to. When I write my column, my wife is basically liberal. And I always try to write my column and think, I want to write a column which she's not necessarily going to agree with, but at least she'll say, okay, I can see that. That's the way, I don't want to preach to the converted. I want to write a column that's sort of reaching a little bit over to the other side and doing the best I can to at least stop and make them think. And I think I more or less succeed, in that. But there are people who you're never going to persuade. There are people in the BDS campaign who you will never win over because they're too invested or they're too stupid or one thing or another. And that has to be borne in mind. you know, when you fight these battles, you're not going to win every single one of them. You're not going to win. All you want to do is win 51%. Or, you know, in George Bush's case, you know, 47%.